sustainability, the automobile industry, and large corporate perspective. The next speaker joining us is Chief Executive Officer, ASDC, a passionate professional with career spanning 3 decades. The initial decade was spent in manufacturing sector, followed by 2 decades of experience across all domains of education and training. Everyone, let's please put our hands together for Mr. Arindam Lahiri, everyone.
Good afternoon. Technology makes life easy also, complex also at times. So I was telling just before this session to Vikrant that I have to attend virtually one center inauguration today. So if I'm not seen around, just go ahead with the next item and then I can come back. But what I figured out that we were supposed to be joined by the minister virtually and that did not happen. So either way, I think it works well. I've been asked to speak on this topic about the automotive industry and the ESG sustainability for the automotive industry. Now, before I get on to the slides, I've always had this interest to look at our homes to understand the basic management jargons. And I started my career as a supply chain professional, and I always say I learned actually my supply chain not from the institute that I went to for my MBA, but from my mom, who used to manage the supply chain at home. And that's exactly the way that you learn inventory management, recycling, all kinds of stuff, how do you ensure quality inputs into the system. So if I look at a ESG as a management concept, I would say that it starts at home. And if all of us understand that, I think it's going to be much easier for every one of us to relate it to each other. Environment, social, and governance, I think all three are very, very critical and integral part of any home. One aspect of environment that I want to talk about, the home environment, is about the cleanliness at home. And one of the things that I do see is that there are a lot of homes where if you go slightly unannounced, will be a lot unclean because somebody has not cleaned it up yet. And we make a tremendous effort throughout the day to make it unclean, to put someone on the job to make it clean back again. But there are homes where even if you arrive unannounced, you will find it clean and may not have been cleaned for the day also. But it's just that we want to keep it clean all the time. And if I connect it with our Mother Earth, we sometimes make a tremendous effort to create a problem of environment and then put all our brains together to try and solve that problem. But if we can put the brains together in the first hand in terms of not making it unclean, I think we'll have a better Mother Earth to live. Okay. Similarly for social, I would say that in a larger family, and especially the traditional Indian family or the Hindu united family, I don't know if that term is well understood by everyone now. But typically what happens is that if somebody is a little weaker perceived in the family, a lot of family members put their efforts together to ensure that that person or that individual still lives a better life. And that's exactly what we can do in our larger society as well, that if we can look around and see that if there is somebody who needs that extra help, that extra hand-holding, can we extend our hand to get that done. And finally, in terms of governance, how you run your family in terms of your finances, in terms of your ability to abide by the laws of the land, knowing the laws of the land, I think it's all can be learned. So I was very amazed with the youngsters, but at the same time, I would love to see that schools actually teach ESG related to their homes rather than just as a subject. A subject doesn't make any difference. Subject comes and goes. Once the curriculum for the year is done, people tend to forget that. But what you learn in your life stays with you throughout your life. And that's what is very important when we talk about educating our youngsters or making them excited about ESG as a concept. But I'll stop here. Let me just go with the flow of the presentation that I had looked at. So if I look at some of the key trends in the automotive industry around ESG, there are two broad heads. One is the technological trends that are there. There are a lot of IT technologies that are getting integrated into the automobiles of today. In terms of the mobility solution, we are looking at suitable use cases for blockchain, Internet of Things, the connectivity, development of 5G, vehicle to everything. And then we also have a supply chain linkage through technology intervention. And finally, I think the biggest impact that on the ESG front that is happening today in the automotive industry is around electrification of vehicles, And there are many formats of that, of course. But overall, as a concept, I think electrification and adoption of electric-powered vehicle is an idea that is being revisited after a gap of about a century now. I come from a city called Calcutta, and I've always seen, the most clean form of transport in terms of the Calcutta tramways, which has always been electric. But we made sure that it doesn't survive. And CTC today in Calcutta runs a bus service full of diesel buses. That's what could be done if we cannot have a basic understanding of ESG and we only see it as a concept and not part of our life. Okay. On macroeconomic trends, I think affordability, especially in emerging countries. India has been a great example where smaller cars have been used largely because they consume less fuel and therefore less damage comparatively to the climate. I remember the first time in mid-90s when I was visiting US and I was asked, so which car do you drive? I told them that I drive an 800cc engine car called Maruti 800. And people asked me, is it a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler? Because in US you won't get an 800cc four-wheeler, you would much rather get an 800cc probably a bike, 1 liter bike essentially. So if we look at, the affordability as a concept, I think this is a macroeconomic trend that we're looking at. Can we have the slide on the, that's it. The greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, of course, I think all of us understand. Vehicles are definitely seen as a significant contributor to the changing of the climate. And we heard this girl talk about very specifically about vehicles being on road and more flyovers being constructed because of that, et cetera, and not looking so much at the public transportation system, which definitely has a valid point of view. And there are certain counter views to that, of course, but they're definitely vehicles as they run emit the pollutions, the emissions, which are, I come from an era where in automotive industry, we used to have vehicles without even the catalytic converter, which was, was first time introduced in the mid-90s in the Indian market because the automobile market was just about growing up in this market. So I think there has been significant change with BS6 norms and now the CAFE norms that were there in the industry. I think there is significant focus on emissions, but there are very strong, aggressive government policies to make sure that we have fleet emissions under control, and we also have restricted use of IC engine vehicles and more of electric and much rather alternate energy vehicles, I would say. Next, please. So if I look at all the three heads, if I look at environmental challenges, the social challenges, and the governance challenges, I think most of these problems across the countries are fairly similar. It could be slightly more in some areas, slightly less in some areas. But these are broadly the areas where we are talking about pollution, consumption of natural resources. Are we able to recycle? Can we get a circular car? The concept of a circular car is picking up speed in the industry. Can we look at building a circular car, which can be completely recycled? Okay. Social challenges, of course, human rights, worker rights, and environment, health, and safety, EHS, is a significant part of our social responsibility in the industry. Safety is a big ticket thing for the automotive industry. In the Indian industry, I think there is a very, very significant focus in the larger corporations in terms of the safety norms. However, as we go down the various tiers of manufacturers and enter the MSME segment, there are very significant violations of safety norms that do happen, and therefore leading to loss of workforce or impacting adversely the health and the livelihood opportunity of the workforce due to safety issues. And finally, on the governance issues, obviously there are areas of corporate structure, risk management, ethics, very, very strong global cases, the Dieselgate and all of that kind of, where you kind of tamper with, the data that you put out to the governing or the regulatory authorities. And so there are significant governance issues that also drives the automotive industry. Next. From an environment sustainability perspective, I think the automotive industry talks about three major things, that this today is part of a strategic issue within every large corporation, automotive included, because there is a separate function of environment or sustainability, chief sustainability officer, chief sustainability office within the organization. So organization structures getting aligned to giving importance to the sustainability as a philosophy within the corporate working. Implementation of the sustainability initiatives, however, is very fragmented, because it's still largely significantly event-based or initiative-based, but it's not a part of the day-to-day working of the organization. I think Professor from ISB was talking about making ESG part of the decision-making process. And how do we make that, enable that within the industry is still a challenge that exists. Not only in India, but I think globally also it's still a challenge. It's expected about $50 billion to be invested to meet the sustainability targets. I was reading this report where we looked at about 6 countries, and we're talking about the sustainability investments that these companies in these countries have done in 2019 and 2022 as a percentage of their revenue. And unfortunately, I think except Sweden, all the other countries, it has dropped from the 2019 levels to 2022 level, the levels that are there in 2022. That's a concern. In amount, pure amounts term, it has increased, but as a percentage of their income, revenue, that has dropped, and that remains a concern for the industry. Next. So there are 4 key priorities that I could gather from the various reports, etc., in terms of sustainability. One is, of course, the net zero target. I think Vikrant, when he started, or I think Raman-san talked about that India has committed to 2070 for net zero, but I think every country has a net zero target, and every industry and every organization is looking at a net zero target. So that is a key priority in terms of the sustainability, and so is it in the automotive industry. Electrification of vehicle fleets. Just an example, Volvo plans to reach net zero emissions globally by 2040. And I know we have our friends from Michelin, and you also have a net zero target. So I think everyone has set the targets, and that's, I think, one of the big first steps that has been taken, that we are recognizing that this is important for us to survive. Electrification of vehicle fleets. Despite all the effects of pandemic that had impacted the automotive industry a lot, we've seen increased investment in autonomous vehicle and electric vehicles from companies like GM. Honda, I think, has already pledged that they want to make a 100% shift to electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles by 2040, and in steps from 2030 onwards, starting with about 40%. Next. Sustainable manufacturing is a very important area, because that's another area which is of a deep concern when we talk about environmental sustainability. So a lot of waste that we generate as part of the manufacturing process, as well as the utilities, the electricity and the water that we use for our plants, how do we make that as a sustainable process within our plants is a very important one. I think OEMs are very concerned on that, but how do we take it to the next level, which is where the sustainable supply chain comes in. And the entire supply chain is also geared to it in terms of having a green supply chain for the automotive industry. It's easier said than done. Significant efforts are being made. How do you use sustainable materials? Very interesting recent one project that I have been discussing with some of my colleagues from the industry is about Mercedes's experiments with bamboo as a trim material. Very interesting use case that can come up where we could get into how do you reduce the plastics in the car, essentially. At one point in time, there was no plastic in the car. We came a full circle where almost the car was going to be made out of plastic. And now we are talking about how to get back to zero plastic, So we are trying to reinvent the wheel in the car industry in that way. Okay, next. So these are the major areas. Direct emissions, which is, of course, one is vehicle emissions, the other is plant emissions. Then there are indirect emissions, which means the electricity that you use, the water that you use, there are emissions of those providers as well, or your supply chain, etc., that you look at. Waste management, whatever waste you produce. Energy utilization, how efficient can you be in terms of your energy utilization in your plants. Water management, conservation of natural resources, recyclable material. With electric vehicles, it adds a new dimension to that again, because you're talking about how do you manage your end-of-life process for your batteries. Do you do second life of batteries? Do you recycle those batteries somewhere? Do you incinerate those? How do you manage that? And that's a very key area of focus that I think the automotive industry will have going forward. Next. Circular economy initiatives, only about 41% of, this is a part of a study that was conducted by Capgemini Research Institute, where they talk about, that there are 53% of the automotive companies have adopted a circular strategy, 45% adhere to circularity principle, and only about 41% factor circularity matrix into business decisions. And this is an area where I think there has to be a significant improvement over a period of time. And this is something which must form part of the board's targets in each of these companies in terms of getting closer to a circular car. Next. From an Indian perspective, I think there are some of the major initiatives that I would want to highlight from a government and an OEM perspective. Of course, is encouraging the adoption of EVs. We all know FAME 1 and FAME 2 has been here, faster adoption of electric vehicles. And we are already talking about in the ministry in terms of FAME 3. That will be very, very significant. Almost 25 states has an active EV policy across the country with various kinds of financial, non-financial incentives that has been built as part of this initiative. Introduction of circularity, I think, has been a big step when we have had the vehicle scrappage policy to scrap vehicles. I think this can also add significant value. It is estimated that by 2050, this itself in India can add to $600+ billion in terms of value addition, in terms of scrappage of vehicles. Two major initiatives so far: Mahindra, which is Mahindra Zero. They already have about 3 plants. I think they want to do about 25 recycling plants across India 2025. About a year back, I had visited Zero in Greater Noida. Great to see that there is, I stayed for a significant part of Delhi near a place called Mayapuri, which is the kabaddi market of Delhi, where all the vehicles get scrapped. And it was such a refreshing view to see the facility at Mahindra Zero that India has moved ahead in terms of getting this done. And of course, Maruti and Toyota Tsusho has also talked about with a high capacity vehicle scrappage unit that they already have near Greater Noida. Again, 24,000 units per month is the capacity that they have for scrapping. Next. Conservation of energy and resources. I think this is another area where a lot of OEMs have made very significant effort. I've just picked up randomly a couple of examples. Toyota, there are 60% of the dealerships which use eco-wash, which is kind of a waterless cleaning of vehicles. They have also included environment management system certifications for their dealerships, which I think by and large now most OEMs have already adopted this as an initiative. Dry washing is something which is catching up. It's still a long way to go beyond some of the key metros where authorized dealerships still use that. I think there is a significant amount of adoption that still needs to be done. But these are some areas that can be done. And just to remind you all that by 2030, the Government of India plans to achieve an EV sales penetration of 80% for 2 and 3 wheelers, which we can already see the traction happening. In fact, it may happen even faster. And we have 70% of commercial vehicles, 30% private cars, and 40% buses. I think I'm done. Just go. Yeah. Done. No, I'm done. I'm done more or less. Probably the last slide. This is, again, just go back, on Capgemini Research Institute report only. I think a very significant part of, people that have listed as a top challenge is, making sustainability part of the day-to-day activity, linking it with that, And that is where it still remains as a separate function, but not embedded into everything that we do in an organization. And I think that's a very critical part of it. Lack of alignment between key sustainability KPIs and the performance targets. The performance targets are decided independent of the ESG targets, effectively. And that linkage can be very significantly reduced. And some of the other areas in difficulty in measuring, which I think we'll have a session later in the day where we are going to talk about matrices and their measurements. Internal alignment on sustainability initiatives. Lack of sufficient good quality data from sustainability initiative. Again, data management, data analytics related to sustainability remains a skill which is very rarely available in the industry today. And that leads to also a significant amount of challenge of measuring, being able to measure what is being done in this area. So I'll stop here. I think that's all I had to say in terms of the ESG. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm around for the day. If we need to catch up on anything, I'd love to do that. Thank you very much.